Okay, if you were checking in your afternoon classes or study hall for the link to today's video, I apologize. Had some technical difficulties getting this one started today, um, but we'll get right to it. If you take out your Chapter 4, Section 2 reading notes, remember you should be taking notes on the presentation over on this side, so that when we come to class tomorrow, we can kind of bring it all together. This will really be two-part presentation tonight and tomorrow night. Let's start with this image of kind of the breaking point in the relationship, the Boston Massacre. And I guess I would like for this image to just kind of represent for you that point of no return for both sides, really. This is an event that is going to be difficult to recover from. And so with that in mind, the goal of this reading and then this presentation tonight is to get you to be thinking about the fact that we don't have this unanimous decision on the part of the colonists to rebel, revolt, start a new country. And so what I want you just to start understanding for tomorrow is that there were differing opinions among the colonists about their future with England or independent of England. We just kind of take it for granted that the colonists rebelled. Everybody was on the same page and they became a new country. Just to review some things, as I showed you this last week, early on, post-French and Indian War, when the relationship began to change, you could roughly define the population as being 1/3 Patriots, 1/3 Loyalists, and 1/3 kind of indifferent people. What you've read about today, and what we're going to look at a little bit more closely today in this presentation is the shifting percentages. So this number getting a lot larger, this number becoming a little bit smaller, and this number kind of gravitating towards really the Patriots, not so much the Loyalists. And so where I think we should start is just kind of quickly reviewing the problems that get us to this point. So, I'm going to highlight again this idea of direct taxation without representation. This is a sticking point for the colonists. The idea of not having representation in the parliament, yet that body being okay with presenting them with direct taxes, things like the Stamp Act, things like tea taxes, things that the colonists rebelled against with the Boston Tea Party, that they boycotted goods because of the presence of the taxes, or that they petitioned their government for calling off the taxes like they do with the Stamp Act Congress. The protests against the taxes lead directly to this second problem. I'm pointing instead of doing this. The second problem, which is soldiers in New England specifically, soldiers in the colonies. And this is important because it really changes the nature of the relationship. Now it's a very in-your-face, almost authoritarian relationship that the mother country is giving to the colonies. What you read about at the end of Chapter 4, Section 1 was the idea of the coercive acts, and it's this. I want to emphasize this, and I know I talked about it in my last presentation, but now this is going to become a really important concept for us in this new unit. Distant authority versus local control. It's going to be the basis of not only the American Revolution, but also early American political thought. So it's important that you understand this. The coercive acts was really just an example of what the colonists, what the Americans, will start to refer to them as the Americans, had the biggest problem with, which was this distant authority over in England, presenting them with things that they had to do, things that they had to pay, rules that they had to follow, that they did not have any consent over. And this is the idea of a distant authority. And the coercive acts come at the expense of local control. So, for example, the governor of Massachusetts is appointed. He's an agent of the king in Parliament, and he does not have to answer to the Massachusetts legislature that was elected. So the British have negated the power of colonial populations' government, their own government, that we know, thinking back to Unit 1, that we know developed because of these periods of intermittent neglect, of salutary neglect. They had to develop. And now they're being told it's not okay that you have those. It's huge. And then lastly, this idea of the First Continental Congress. And this is so significant because it demonstrates the ability of the colonies to kind of come together and at least start to talk about issues that they have in common. Because up to this point, they were very independent of one another. They were maybe feeling independent of England, but they were independent of one another. But the First Continental Congress is this example of them coming together to at least start to talk about some of the things that they're facing, that England's doing to each of the colonies, and it's starting to get them to ask the question: Can we be on the same page? Can we cooperate with one another? And so as we transition into new information, we'll start with 1775. England, as they're watching these protests and they're watching these boycotts, they make a pretty important early decision that they identify this as a New England problem. Was it a New England problem? Is this something that's Boston and Boston alone? And if you cut out the problem in Boston, everything else will be fine. That's why we see the first skirmish, Lexington and Concord. This is an American victory. It's an interesting story that you should have read about in your textbook. The English were targeting Boston specifically because they view that as the heart of the problem. They view Boston as being kind of the epicenter of any dissension among the colonists. The American population were divided between Patriots and Loyalists, and it's the English assumption that most of the Patriots are in Boston and that the rest of this Patriot movement will die if Boston goes down. They're banking on defeating Boston. In reaction to Lexington and Concord, in reaction to the increased British presence in North America, specifically in the future United States of America, the Second Continental Congress gets together in 1775, and what they do is they assume the responsibility of the war, which is big because it tells England this isn't just a Boston problem, this is an American problem. You might remember from your reading that you read a little bit about Patrick Henry and Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death, but he also voices the idea that, despite the fact that I'm from Virginia and you're from Massachusetts, we have to come together as Americans to deal with this. But I want to stress something as I go back to what our goal is today, the differing opinions among the colonists of what their future is, even in this Second Continental Congress, which will be the body that gives us the Declaration of Independence. Early on, there was still doubt about that. It was not a popular idea to think about independence. Rather, they were trying to find ways to get the king and parliament to agree to taking some of these taxes and these burdens away in exchange for them stopping their boycotting and their protests. And so this is this idea of the olive branch petition. They're not ready to split. They're not ready to break away yet. So this American population that we need to be thinking about, and I'm just going to flip back one more time real quick, to be able to understand the differences among the colonists, we have to identify the different groups that existed. As things get worse with England for the colonies, the group of Patriots grows and the group of Loyalists shrinks, but they still do exist. And what I want you to think about is, the Patriots, these are the guys, these are the people that are committed to getting England to give them what they want, and when they realize they're not going to get what they want, they become in favor of outright independence. Some of them were in favor of outright independence from the beginning, others will get there, but that's that whole Patriot group. Whereas the Loyalists, they are more in favor of finding ways to get back in good graces with England, hoping that England will, take away some of these taxes, take away some of these burdens that they've put on them. But they have some interesting issues, and I just want to talk about that for a second. This idea of who did they fear? The Patriots fear a distant authority. The Patriots like their own freedoms at home. The Patriots, in a sense, are representative of this group of Americans that they view England as something really different, a different culture, a different society that's putting these rules on them, and they don't want these rules. And if England's going to be insistent about this, they'd rather just not be a part of England anymore. Whereas that's who they fear. That's what they fear. The Loyalists, they still feel loyalty towards England. What they fear are those Patriots. They fear, losing or breaking with England and knowing what the problem was and becoming this new thing and not knowing what the problem is. That is, I'm not going to pay taxes to England, but I'm going to pay taxes to these people, this new government that's going to form in America, and they have a problem with that. There's a great quote in the book. I should see if I can read it specifically, where it says, I hope it's in the book. Yeah, here it is. If I must be enslaved, let it be by a king, at least, and not by a parcel of upstart lawless committeemen. If I must be devoured, let me be devoured by the jaws of a lion, and not gnawed to death by rats and vermin. And that's this idea of the Loyalists. You know, at least I know what I'm in for with a king and parliament. With you guys, who knows what you're going to do? And so that just speaks to this idea of the differing opinions among the colonists about their future. You know, their future with England is a lot safer for a loyalist, in their opinion, than their future with an independent country in America. And then the last thing I just want to chat about real quick here is whoa, look at that. Thinking, yeah. Is this Thomas Paine character. And we can talk a little bit more about him in class tomorrow, but you know, Thomas Paine he's a British guy who comes to America. He really fails at just about everything he tries to do, but he gets caught up in the fervor, the excitement of the movement towards the American Revolution. And in 1776, he publishes this infamous pamphlet, this famous pamphlet, Common Sense, and in it he places the argument for independence in language that average people could understand and read. It wasn't written at a level that was above people's head. It was written right to them. And what's important about this is that he ties this American cause to the basic premises of Enlightenment thinking, that all men have certain rights and they shouldn't have those rights taken away by anybody. He's going to be an inspiration for the Declaration of Independence, which is what we're going to move into tomorrow. But what he does is he popularizes this movement. He makes it mainstream. It's not just about the people who were overly burdened by the taxes. Now it's about people who feel American. So we have kind of a culmination of all these different relationship breakdowns that we've been talking about for 2 weeks. And they finally come together when we have this American population who's being pushed back and forth. They're feeling victimized. There's this presence of a British military in their country. And then they get this statement, this argument in words that they understand, and it kind of puts them in a place where they think, yeah, this is what I agree with. And so that grows the Patriots' numbers significantly, and it even convinces some people that we maybe would call loyalists. And so what this brings us to is this understanding of how these differing opinions existed during this period of really from 1763 to 1776. We have this building tension between England and the colonies, and things happen where the colonies feel like the tension can no longer be withstood, and they start to act on that, whether it's through boycotts or things like that. And ultimately we get this decision that, all right, that's it. We can't do this anymore. And so tomorrow in class I'll use this idea of Lexington and Concord, and we will talk about the point of no return and how that point of no return is either going to lead to independence, and that's the future, or it's going to lead to a very altered future under England. So we'll pick up with that in class tomorrow. If you have questions, feel free to email.